In the 21st century, the rivalry between the United States and China has become one of the most defining features of international politics. For decades, America enjoyed its position as the uncontested global superpower, but the rapid rise of China has changed everything. Today, what we are witnessing is more than just competition between two nations. It is the emergence of what many are calling a new Cold War. This struggle is not only about military strength, but also about technology, trade, ideology, and global influence. To understand this confrontation, we must trace how it developed, why it is intensifying, and what it means for the future of the world. The seeds of this rivalry were planted decades ago, when China began its economic reforms in the late 20th century. From a poor and isolated country, China transformed itself into the world's second-largest economy in record time. Factories sprouted across the country, global companies outsourced their production there, and China became the workshop of the world. The United States initially welcomed this growth, hoping that greater economic integration would lead China toward liberal democracy. Instead, China embraced capitalism while keeping its authoritarian political system intact. The result was a powerful hybrid, an economy capable of competing with the United States, guided by a centralized government willing to challenge American dominance. The first major fault line in this rivalry emerged in the realm of trade. For years, Washington accused Beijing of unfair trade practices, intellectual property theft, and currency manipulation. The Trump administration escalated these tensions by launching a trade war, imposing tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. China retaliated with its own tariffs, and global markets trembled as the world's two largest economies clashed head-on. Even though President Biden softened the rhetoric, the competition never ended. In fact, it expanded into new arenas like technology, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence, where both nations are desperate to secure dominance. Technology has become the true battlefield of this new Cold War. The United States has tried to cripple Chinese tech giants like Huawei and TikTok, citing national security concerns. The real issue, however, is control over the technologies that will shape the future. 5G networks, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. Washington fears that if Beijing leads in these areas, America's global dominance will collapse. To counter this, the US has restricted exports of advanced semiconductors to China while pouring billions into its own tech industry. China, for its part, is racing ahead with state-backed investments, determined not to remain dependent on the West. The result is an arms race not of nuclear missiles, but of microchips, algorithms, and data. The story of Huawei illustrates the depth of this battle. Once a little-known telecom company, Huawei became a global leader in building 5G networks. But the US accused it of being a tool of the Chinese state, a backdoor for espionage, and a threat to national security. Washington pressured allies to ban Huawei equipment from their networks, while simultaneously sanctioning the company, cutting off its access to vital American technology like semiconductors. Huawei's smartphone business, once rivaling Apple, nearly collapsed under these restrictions. Yet China did not give up. Instead, it poured resources into building its own semiconductor industry, seeking independence from American suppliers. This conflict was not just about one company, but about who controls the infrastructure of the future digital economy. TikTok, another flashpoint, shows how deep the rivalry runs. For millions of teenagers around the world, TikTok is just a fun app. But for Washington, it is a Trojan horse. A Chinese-owned platform gathering data on Americans and potentially influencing their opinions. The Trump administration tried to ban it outright, while the Biden administration has sought ways to regulate or force its sale to an American company. Beijing, of course, resists these moves, calling them unfair. The battle over TikTok is symbolic of a larger struggle. Who controls the flow of information in the 21st century, and whose narratives will dominate global consciousness? The rivalry also extends to geography, particularly in the South China Sea and around Taiwan. China has built artificial islands, fortified them with military bases, and declared much of the South China Sea as its own territory. This is one of the busiest trade routes in the world, and America insists on keeping it open for international navigation. US warships routinely patrol the area in what they call freedom of navigation operations, while Chinese vessels shadow them closely, creating dangerous standoffs. Taiwan remains the most explosive flashpoint. Beijing considers the island a breakaway province that must eventually reunite with the mainland, by force if necessary. Washington, while not officially recognizing Taiwan as independent, continues to arm and support it, warning China against military action. Each time US politicians visit Taipei, Beijing responds with military drills and aggressive rhetoric. The world watches nervously, aware that a miscalculation here could ignite a global conflict. Imagine the consequences if a conflict erupted over Taiwan. Taiwan produces the majority of the world's most advanced semiconductors, the tiny chips that power everything from smartphones to fighter jets. A war that disrupted this supply would send shockwaves through the global economy, shutting down industries, collapsing stock markets, and leaving nations scrambling for alternatives. Moreover, a US-China clash could drag in regional powers like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, creating a war not just over an island, but over the future of global technology and security. Military analysts warn that even a limited conflict could result in massive casualties and devastate the economies of both superpowers. The shadow of such a catastrophe looms large over every naval drill, every political statement, and every military maneuver in the region. Beyond military maneuvers, the US and China are battling for global influence. China's Belt and Road Initiative has poured billions into infrastructure projects across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Roads, ports, and power plants built with Chinese loans tie dozens of countries closer to Beijing. Critics call it debt trap diplomacy, but many developing nations see it as an opportunity to modernize. Pakistan's China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, for example, includes highways, railways, and energy projects worth tens of billions of dollars. In Africa, Chinese companies are building railroads from Kenya to Ethiopia, as well as stadiums, airports, and power stations. These projects create jobs and infrastructure, but also leave countries indebted to Beijing. The United States, lacking such massive infrastructure initiatives, relies on its traditional alliances and institutions like NATO, the IMF, and the World Bank. This creates a global chessboard, with nations choosing sides or attempting to balance between the two giants. History offers important lessons for understanding this rivalry. The original Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union divided the world into two camps, locked in a struggle that lasted for decades. While the Soviet Union eventually collapsed, China is a far stronger competitor than the USSR ever was. Its economy is deeply integrated with the global market, its military is modernizing at lightning speed, and its technological ambitions are immense. Unlike the isolated Soviet Union, China is a central player in globalization, making the current confrontation far more complex. The old Cold War was defined by nuclear deterrence and ideological propaganda. The new Cold War is defined by economic interdependence, technology, and information warfare. During the First Cold War, there were proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. In this new Cold War, proxy struggles take the form of trade deals, influence campaigns, and competing infrastructure projects. This rivalry also plays out in cyberspace. Both nations accuse each other of hacking, cyber espionage, and digital propaganda. American companies worry about Chinese surveillance, while Chinese officials accuse the West of trying to destabilize their society through information manipulation. The battle over TikTok exemplifies this struggle. Washington argues it is a tool for Chinese influence, while millions of young Americans see it as just another entertainment app. The deeper issue is who controls the digital platforms that shape public opinion in the 21st century. Meanwhile, both nations have been accused of launching cyber attacks on each other's government institutions, businesses, and critical infrastructure. In 2015, hackers allegedly linked to China breached US government databases, exposing the personal information of millions of federal employees. In response, American cyber units have targeted Chinese networks, leading to a shadow war that remains largely invisible but extremely dangerous. Economically, both sides face risks. The US still holds the upper hand in innovation, finance, and global military reach. But China's vast manufacturing power and growing consumer market give it leverage. Supply chains have become weapons in this conflict, as the COVID-19 pandemic revealed the dangers of dependency. Both nations are now trying to decouple, building separate systems that reduce their reliance on each other. This decoupling could split the global economy into two rival blocs, forcing smaller nations to choose between Washington and Beijing. Already, some countries lean toward the US for security, while turning to China for trade and investment. Others attempt to stay neutral, but the pressure is mounting. The semiconductor war is the clearest example. Taiwan remains the center of chip production, but both the US and China are investing billions to build their own domestic industries. The outcome will shape not only economics but also military capabilities, since modern weapons depend on advanced chips. The ideological dimension cannot be ignored. The United States portrays itself as the defender of democracy and human rights, criticizing Beijing's authoritarianism, its policies in Xinjiang, and its crackdown in Hong Kong. China, in response, accuses America of hypocrisy, pointing to US interventions abroad, racial injustice, and domestic divisions. Each side uses these narratives not only to justify its own policies, but also to influence global opinion. The struggle is not just about who is stronger, but about whose model of governance will inspire the future. America argues that democracy, despite its flaws, offers freedom and accountability. China counters that its centralized model delivers stability, rapid development, and order, claiming it is more suitable for the modern age. This battle of ideas is as significant as the military and economic rivalry. Domestic politics in the United States also shaped the rivalry. Under Trump, the approach was confrontational, with tariffs, bans on Chinese apps, and an aggressive stance on Taiwan. Under Biden, the tone shifted slightly, with more emphasis on alliances and multilateralism, but the core strategy remained the same: contain China's rise. In Beijing, President Xi Jinping has consolidated power, portraying China as a nation that has finally regained its rightful place after centuries of humiliation by foreign powers. He presents the rivalry with the United States as a struggle for national dignity and survival, rallying his people around the idea of resisting Western domination. These internal narratives make compromise difficult, as neither leader wants to appear weak in front of domestic audiences. Ordinary people across the world feel the effects of this rivalry in ways they might not always recognize. Rising prices, shortages of electronics, visa restrictions, and increased surveillance are all consequences of this global standoff. Students, workers, and entrepreneurs find themselves caught between two systems pulling in different directions. For many nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, this rivalry is both an opportunity and a burden. Chinese investment can bring development, but it also comes with strings attached. American support provides security, but it also demands loyalty. Navigating between the two giants is a challenge every leader now faces. Would you like me to continue this section by moving into the risks of escalation, such as the potential for military confrontation, or shift toward the possibility of cooperation between the US and China despite the rivalry? The danger, of course, is that competition turns into direct conflict. Military exercises around Taiwan grow larger each year, and accidental clashes could escalate beyond control. Both nations possess powerful militaries, nuclear arsenals, and advanced cyber weapons. A war between them would devastate not only their own economies but also the entire world. This is why many analysts argue that we are entering not just a Cold War, but potentially a prelude to something far worse. History warns us that great power rivalries often end in war, and avoiding such an outcome requires extraordinary diplomacy and restraint. Yet despite these dangers, there are also reasons for hope. Both nations remain economically intertwined, with billions of dollars in trade flowing daily between them. Global challenges like climate change, pandemics, and terrorism require cooperation that neither side can achieve alone. Even at the height of the original Cold War, the US and Soviet Union found ways to talk, negotiate arms control, and prevent total disaster. Perhaps the same can happen today, if leaders recognize that their rivalry must not destroy the very world they seek to lead. As we look ahead, the rivalry between the United States and China will define the 21st century. It will shape economies, technologies, and the global balance of power. It will test alliances, divide nations, and determine the future of democracy and authoritarianism. Whether this becomes a Cold War that can be managed or a hot war that engulfs the planet depends on choices being made right now in Washington and Beijing. The world stands on edge, watching two giants struggle for supremacy, aware that the outcome will affect every corner of the Earth. The story is still being written.